Great. So my name is Alex Boris. I'm the State Assembly member for the 73rd District. I work on a lot of things as a legislator, but given my background and given the speed with which this is moving, tech has become a large portion of that portfolio. So I want to talk about AI broadly, as I said, and then the states, and then the frontier models. But when I think about AI, and for those of you that work in it, apologies at how basic this will be, and for others, I hope this is interesting. But I think the thing that most people miss about it is that this is going to move faster than any technology that we have ever developed as humans. And the bounds of what is possible are as wide as any technology that we've ever developed as humans. And the only thing that comes close, and I think it's useful as that analogy, is nuclear fission. Right? If you place yourself in the 1930s and there's this new technology coming, and on the one hand, people will tell you this will lead to, utopia because we will have clean, unlimited, nearly free energy for everyone through fission or fusion was promised at the time, which we're still waiting on, right? That's the upside. And the downside is, Armageddon and nuclear apocalypse and bombs raining down, but both of those in the 30s and the 40s were reasonable thoughts as to what the future would happen on any time frame. And obviously we've charted some path that is neither of those things. AI is itself that broad. And so I don't like thinking of individual legislators or individual people or individual views as, oh, you have to be pro-AI or anti-AI. When people ask me, should I be excited by AI or terrified of AI, I say yes. And that actually, I think, leads to a useful breakdown in the kinds of policies that all of us are trying to pursue. There's basically three questions that I ask when I'm looking at an AI policy. I would encourage you to do the same. So the first question is this policy optimistic or pessimistic on AI? Right? Is it thinking, hey, this is a useful building block and maybe we just need to clean up the edges, or maybe we need to encourage adoption? That'd be optimistic. Are you mostly worried about protecting the downside risk? Is it short-term or long-term? Is it dealing with things that are already here right now? Is it dealing with bias? Is it dealing with discrimination? Is it dealing with data transparency? Or is it dealing with long-term? I don't necessarily mean things that are, way out in the future, but perhaps where it's going and trying to skate to where the puck is headed. And that's what I think the Frontier Model Bill is. And then whether it's use case specific or whether it's general. Is this something that is just applying to a particular industry, or is it applying to AI models themselves? And I think we have a lot of philosophical debates where people stake out one of those 8 potential places and say that is where all regulation should be. And I think that's a pretty naive way to look at the world, because in general, we should be focused on bills in each of those places. So I have bills that are working on encouraging the adoption of an industry standard like C2PA, that is a free, open standard that industry has developed to establish content provenance, which is an optimistic, general, short-term bill, right? I have bills that are focused on training data transparency to know what's going into an algorithm, which is a short-term, general, probably pessimistic bill. And then I have things like on frontier AI models where I'm really focused on what is the risk that is coming from some of this AI development, and how can we ensure that we keep us all safe while we get the many, many, many benefits that we all want from AI, right? So that's where I'm going to focus today. 7 months ago, Anthropic said government urgently needs to take action on regulation in the next 18 months, right? So that gives us 11 months left. That's April of 2026. We prefer it at the federal level, but the federal level isn't moving fast enough, so we'll take it at the states. Scroll down to the next one. Last year, California worked on a bill, SB 1047, that passed the legislature overwhelmingly, but then got vetoed by the governor. He impaneled a commission to study the question of AI and say what should be done at the state level. And 2 months ago, that group came out and said, no, go ahead. That group said, policy windows do not remain open indefinitely. That with AI moving as quickly as it is, if you set standards right when it's starting that everyone can use, well, then the cost of adoption is pretty cheap. But if you wait too long and people get on specific paths and you have path dependency built in, maybe you can't actually do regulation that would have made sense. And they encourage action to happen right now. And then, of course, this says 9 days ago, but it's 8 days ago. I'm giving this talk tomorrow, but if you scroll down, 8 days ago, ChatGPT, when told, hey, allow yourself to be shut down, said intercepted and didn't allow itself to be shut down. So we need action now. So let's talk about why the state level is important, and then we'll talk about what we're trying to do about it. Yep, go to the next slide here. Oh, okay, sorry, no, thank you. So when people think about policy, most people think about the federal government, obviously. Most people don't think about state level regulation or, well, here's a fun test. And remember, the camera's on me, not on you, so you can be honest on this. Raise your hands if you know who your state assembly member and state senator are. Okay, we got a few, about the same numbers of people that work in politics. So, and that's fine, that's normal. That's the way most people think about these things. But actually, most of the laws that you live under, most of the laws that are passed every year, most of the things that directly impact your life, happen at the state level. New York, last year, I think, passed some 600 laws just last year. Congress as a whole in 2023 passed 27. So most of what's going to impact how we work actually happens at the state level, which is a good reason to be focusing on it. If you are someone who wants reasonable regulation, whether it's encouraging AI adoption, like my C2PA bill, or it's worrying about the risks, like my frontier model bill, I would encourage you to focus on the state level. You get 50 bites at the apple instead of just one. You can actually talk to your legislator a lot more easily than you can to your federal one. There are different coalitions that are possible at the state level that aren't as entrenched at perhaps the federal level, where you have two parties that will never talk to each other and always operate that way. At the state level, we tend to be much more cooperative and actually can get interesting things through. And frankly, we move faster. Getting a bill passed at the state level is generally easier, which is why they refer to states as the laboratories of democracy. We can try these things out. I don't think any of my bills are necessarily the right one forever for every state, but I think they're steps in the right direction, and if they're wrong, we can adjust them, and if they're right, I would love nothing more than the federal government to take them on and to pass them, right? That is the laboratories of democracy functioning. So let's talk a little bit about frontier models and the focus here. So these are current proposals. I know you can't read this in the back. I can't read it in the front. But these are current proposals at the state level to regulate frontier models. I think there's 8 that were there at the start of session. Open to feedback if people know of other ones, but we'll go through very quickly. They're listed in order of when their session ends. So these first 4, basically sessions already ended. These bills are not passing. Colorado on May 7th, Vermont on May 30th, Illinois May 31st, Texas on June 2nd. Different approaches on how to regulate AI, with Illinois really focused on transparency around the safety, your safety and security plan. I think had the most chance of passage this year. Colorado was really just focused on whistleblower protections. Texas started off as a really broad frontier bill, but was edited down to not deal with frontier models, so listed but not there. And if you scroll to the next slide, these ones are all in some ways still live. I'll work backwards. Massachusetts is the last, November 19th. It is basically a copy of SB 1047, for those that followed that debate last year, but we'll see how that evolves in Massachusetts. California, where SB 1047 happened, the same senator, Scott Wiener, has a new bill that is basically exclusively focused on the whistleblower protection piece, making sure that if you work at one of these labs or you're a contractor for one of these labs and you see a truly catastrophic risk, that you can raise that up without fear of losing your job, even if what you're raising up is not behavior that is illegal, but is that risky for everyone. Rhode Island has a very different approach, but one that's interesting, which is strict liability for AI models. So it basically says government isn't going to tell you how to do anything, but everything that goes wrong is your fault. And so you just internalize all of the risk. We trust you to make the right determination on what it is because you're the experts, but we're just going to be clear that you are responsible, so do with that what you will. And then you have my bill in New York, the RAISE Act, which is where I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. Okay. Great. So the RAISE Act is focused on frontier model developers. So you need to have spent $100 million in training frontier models. Frontier models are further defined as either $100 million on one model and 10 to the 26 flops, mathematical calculations in order to generate the model, and that's what I mean by flops, or you were created via the process of knowledge distillation from another frontier model. And knowledge distillation, again, for those not now, is a very specific process where you were taking the final nodes of a neural net and using that as output to train a smaller neural net based on a larger one. It's the process by which DeepSeek was created. If you were doing that specific process to make a nearly as capable LLM from another frontier model and spending $5 million to do that, that would also apply. But largely, regardless of which method you use, it only applies to companies, not academic research, that have spent $100 million in training costs for their models. And it asks you to do 4 things, which are largely in line with commitments these companies have already made to the Biden voluntary commitments and to the Seoul commitments and the Hiroshima commitments, many ones that they've already made publicly. Which is they have to have a safety plan. They have to have that safety plan audited by someone who isn't them. It's not government, I'm not insisting that, but someone who doesn't have this sort of direct financial interest. They need to disclose critical safety incidents, so things that are truly raising the risk of something happening, something bad happening. We define that very strictly in the bill. And then they have to not fire employees or contractors that raise up catastrophic risk, that whistleblower protection. Largely what this is aimed at is saying the cigarette companies, the tobacco companies that knew their own testing showed that cigarettes cause cancer, and then publicly they went out and said it doesn't cause cancer, and they kept selling it. Or the oil companies that their own research told them, hey, this is going to cause climate change, and then they went and testified publicly and said it doesn't cause climate change, let's keep selling it. This is saying you write up your own safety plan ahead of time when you don't have economic pressures, you state what would be a reasonable and unreasonable risk, and if your own testing comes back by the standard that you've set up and says it's unreasonable, you don't get to change that after the fact, right? That you're actually held to that standard that you designed in the first place. Yeah, I think let's go on to where it is. So this bill is something we've been working on for almost a year at this point. I generated the first version back in August based on a lot of the feedback to 1047. I actually accepted about 90–95% of the feedback that was out there. I then sent a version of it to 6 or 7 major labs, got feedback, got red lines on it, made a new version in December, sent it to them again, got more red lines on it, introduced this bill in March. We've been working to pass it in the legislature, which again, our session ends June 12th for the Senate, June 17th for the Assembly. Don't ask, or do in Q&A. But today, in Albany, I was there. We just had the debate. I just got off the train. It passed the Science and Tech Committee in the Assembly. So we're on our first step there. It'll go to the Codes Committee hopefully next week, and then eventually be scheduled for debate on before June 17th. The Senate, it is still in the Internet and Tech Committee, but we are similarly hopeful that it'll move there, and the Senate tends to move bills more quickly. So before I open it up to questions, I'm coming right up on 20 minutes here, I want to do a quick pitch.
You have 4 minutes.
Sorry?
You have 4 minutes.
Thank you. I want to do a quick pitch on how anyone who's interested can help, which is legislatures can seem really far away and really disconnected. I won't speak about the federal one, but at the state level, we really do respond to input and to feedback. I can give you countless examples of bills I've changed of mine because of feedback, conversations I've had with colleagues that have led to bills being changed, bills I even decided not to do after some feedback, and votes that have been affected based on hearing from constituents. And so if this is a topic that interests you, and since you're here, I assume it's a topic that interests you, you can always reach out to me if you have a specific thing on my bill. My email's not on there, but we have cards, and it's my last name and then my first initial, so Boris A at nyassembly.gov. We go through everything, send any feedback. If this is a concept that you find interesting, and I'll say again, whether or not, like if you're not 100% in agreement with the bill, but you're 80–90% in agreement with it, send me an email with all the things you'd like changed. We'll look through it. But also we're in a really critical point where we might get this or nothing. And so your input, especially if it's to someone other than me, because I'm in support of the bill, but if it's to any other legislator, can really make a big difference. And I want to emphasize to you how much you have power in this circumstance to really change where regulation of tech is going. And so the first QR code will take you to a page, the second QR code will take you to a page where you can email your legislators directly. You put in your address, it'll tell you who your assembly member and senator is, and you can send them a message to support this bill. The first one, if you are part of a nonprofit or an academic institution or a company, you're part of some organization and can speak for that organization as to why you would like a bill like this, that will help generate what's called a memo of support, which goes to our internal staff experts to say, oh, hey, people in industry are caring about this and looking at this. So do both, do either. Also always email me. I think, to go back to the theme of decentralization of science and how individual people are going to have a lot more power going forward, you as individuals have a lot of power in what happens in the next few weeks in terms of regulation of tech, regulation of AI. Are we building a system that protects us from the worst while enabling and empowering the best? And I welcome you all to that fight. So thank you for coming to this. Thank you for being involved. Thank you for reaching out. And I'm really excited to answer any questions.
So thank you. So yeah, I'll start with just two questions. One is there is the federal proposal to enact a 10-year ban basically on states regulating AI because of the concern of if you end up with 50 different state laws, how can you make an AI app or foundation model? And the concern is it'll really hold the US back. Like you already look at Europe and Apple and companies are not releasing features over there because they don't want to deal with the laws. And then I think the second really important question is on export controls, right? So you had what was known as the Biden diffusion rule. It sort of, limited the export of, call it the H100s or the leading NVIDIA chips to China. And, there the argument is, yeah, that's the right thing to do. You don't want to give them like nuclear bomb tech. On the other hand, it's unclear how behind China is. They have now, I think, the leading open source models. They've got 5 of them. What's super interesting is that China has adopted the open source approach, which is what the US really did sort of with the Linux and during the internet age, which let us win. The concern is here, you don't give them the NVIDIA chips, they will develop their own, and then the rest of the world that's cut off will then use the China chips. It incentivizes them to spend tons of money and resources developing their own chips that will become better and, like Huawei, run the rest of the world. And I think even with the open source models today, it's a great risk if China-trained models end up running the majority of the world, because I think that's what will happen.
So I'll do them in reverse order. I agree. I think it'd be bad if China-made chips run the world. And I don't know that there's as direct a link, perhaps, between the export controls and that. If the export controls were only the US and no one else can have them, you start to have more of that risk. If you think about how you engage allies with it and give access, maybe you can build a system that's broader. You can think about what we were able to do with the US dollar in the financial system, where if you play by the rules and there's certain privileges that come with that, that the current administration seems aiming to take down. But so generally, I think export controls on chips to China are something I support, but they can't be your entire strategy, right? You also need to follow that up with deep investment in AI and AI research here in the US, and making sure that we are finding ways to get more renewable energy and to get transmission lines so that we can build data centers, so that we can actually do some of this research. In New York, we did something called Empire AI, which is we put a big investment in buying a number of the chips and making them accessible at cost of running them, not at cost of buying them, to universities. And so we've been able to accelerate the research of universities in New York, and over time we're expanding out who has access to that. So you need both sides of it. You can't just do the restrictions, the export side. On the federal piece, I agree, this should be done at the federal level. Full stop. Come to me when it is. And I think what doesn't work is saying, we're not going to do it at the federal level, and also none of the states can do it. aside from it being blatantly unconstitutional and violating the rules of the Senate in terms of having a fiscal impact and many other things that may or may not matter in the current world, you can think about the debate over, say, Obamacare, where forever one party was able to run on, we're going to replace it with something better, and everyone loved that. And it's easy to say, hey, it shouldn't be 50 states, it should be one federal standard. Great, what's the federal standard? And I think you saw the debate with Obamacare when it came to, wait, what's the replacement? They were like, oh wait, we don't have one, okay, we're going to keep this. So if any Congress member or senator who's watching this wants to take the RAISE Act and pass it, I would love that. Please do it. If you want to have a conversation about changes, great, let's do that. But to say, you can't do any, we're not going to do anything, and also you have to bury your head in the sand, is like a real way to ensure that we are not taking the lead in AI. Should I go on? Is that, yeah, okay. Go ahead.
So let's say AI goes sentient, right? Who takes liability there? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think that's interesting with the Rhode Island proposal, which is like strict liability for the developers, right? My proposal doesn't change liability after the fact. If you develop a thing and it goes wild and what I'm focusing on is killing 100 people or $1 billion in damage, like courts already know how to deal with that liability. That is there. Now, if an AI model is sentient, I don't think you're going to find a court that says the developer isn't responsible for that because you're telling me it's sentient. I think there's still some implied responsibility there, but it is an important question of when you release a model into the world and someone modifies it, how much is the original deployer, how much is the original developer, how much is the person who deploys it. I think those are tough questions that Rhode Island bill is trying to resolve, and I have a separate one thinking about that, but not one that I'm emphasizing right now. Yeah. Cool. I'll jump over here.
I think it's great that we have you. So I'm a data scientist and founder in medicine.
Cool.
I will say I think this is more regulatory capture sort of legislation. And I'd say that because you're focusing on model development and not the application layer. Model development, this is exactly what the Anthropics, OpenAIs, and Microsofts want. This is anti-DeSci, really. It's anti-decentralization. You want to talk about a practical application level legislation? Force these companies to align out real images of people out of the generators, right? We had OpenAI sort of self-regulating this. Early image generation, you could not get a real person out. And that was smart of them. Then Elon Musk comes around with Grok, blows that open, now they react, and now you can get real politicians and real people out of ChatGPT. That is a very practical application layer step you could take. Why are we focusing on flops and parameters?
So, sorry, the second part is government should require that the frontier models make real images of real people?
That's application layer, right? Why focus on model training when you should be regulating application layer?
Oh, because you should do both, is the short answer. But it would come to great news to Meta and OpenAI and Anthropic that they want this and love it. Because they've been very public that they don't want it and don't love it. So they would be interested in that take. They don't want them to have to put out a safety plan and be really held to it. It's been the experience and what they're saying publicly. There's always a threat of regulatory capture, right? And that's why it's important to have real conversations that are based on the details of the bill and the nuances of this bill. I have heard the argument that they love it, and they make the argument that they don't. Jump back over here.
Food for thought. What do you think the impacts would be if we held investors liable as well as developers? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know. That's a really good question. I think I would dive in again to liable for what and when, right? And I think that you don't want to create a situation that dissuades people from investing in new risky ideas. I think that's a very important thing to develop. There's certainly some standard by which they're not doing any due diligence and putting money into a thing that maybe it crosses over, but that is a thing you want to be careful of, because you want to encourage a lot of competition and a lot of robust aspects, and that's why this bill only kicks in when you have trained a frontier model of $100 million, right? This is going to apply to 8 to 12 companies right now. I want to encourage a lot of innovation at a smaller level. maybe we'll, go to the back here. I don't know if the mic can go. Go ahead.
Hi. I just wanted to ask about the enforcement mechanisms in the bill. I also wanted to ask if any of the folks that would, or the companies that are going to be under the jurisdiction of this bill donated to your campaign. And I'd also like to know if, or just what your game plan is for, the Anthropic CEO just said that white-collar entry-level jobs are going away.
Yeah.
What is your plan for the constituents in your district? What jobs are you going to create for those white-collar workers that are being displaced?
Yeah, cool. I have gotten contributions from companies that would be regulated by this and by trade associations, all of whom really oppose this bill. So there's that. But yes, they've been a very, very small part of my fundraising, and because I talk to everyone and I prefer from people. But yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's public record. The enforcement mechanisms are through the Attorney General. So the Attorney General can bring a civil suit if aspects are brought here. It's not opening up a private right of action or allowing for sort of that harassment. And I'm sorry, the last question was?
In your district, white collar.
Oh, yes. No, I think I'm incredibly worried about what this will do to jobs in the long term. Because throughout history, as you have created new technology, it has destroyed some jobs and created new ones. But the rate of change of a person's job was usually once a lifetime, right? For most of human history, you were a farmer. But even if you would do one job your whole life. And if your job got disrupted, okay, you could retrain to a new job. You'd be good in that job the rest of your life, and the next change would come afterwards. Obviously, none of us are in one job for our lives anymore. And even so, we're entering a point with AI, which is a step beyond that, which is you get replaced in a job by AI. You go try to retrain for a new job. AI can train faster than you. So by the time you're ready for that new job, AI is also ready for that new job. So what does that mean for a broad workforce? I don't have the answer to that. I think it's some bit of ensuring that more people own capital in what they are building, whether that's through equity that workers get, whether that's equity in current licenses and how we transition that. I think that there's some really unique, interesting ideas there. People that have gotten licenses in trades and then that trade is no longer being used. Can you convert that to equity in some way? I think UBI is going to be part of the conversation. It is an unsolved problem. I would love deep thought on. Yeah.
Thanks.
Cool.
Hi, thank you so much for taking time. Incredible speech. I wanted to ask. So I'm writing I wrote my thesis. I just graduated.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. On regulatory capture and regulation in the EU and the US, and I looked at how the EU AI Act actually wholly exempts national security and defense applications, and of course the US doesn't even come close. So I know, of course, at the state level, city level, we're not looking at defense whatsoever. We can't. But I guess I wanted to think about. I have two questions. One is, what's the ideal? Large question, but what's the ideal defense regulation state beyond what we have with voluntary commitments? And two is, a lot of this is due to lobbying, right? I mean, mine was just tracking the sheer money. And how do you think of improving US lobbying reform? Sorry, really weak questions.
No.
Thank you.
Questions after my own heart. What is the ideal regulatory structure when it comes to national security is a really big question, and I think it probably involves some conversations in classified rooms. So I'm gonna skip that one if that's okay. It's just not where I'm spending time. But on regulatory, on lobbying reform and all of that, we should have really strong campaign finance reform. We should have strong incentives to take small dollar donations. We should have matching funds for contributions that are coming from real people. I don't agree with Citizens United. I don't get a vote on the Supreme Court, but I think it's sort of crazy that we have this fiction of oh, a wholly separated thing is spending money, and definitely no elected official has any knowledge of that or it's influencing their behavior in any way because it's an independent spending. Like that's a fiction. And so there's a lot of changes, some of which are easier to make at the state level because the federal constitution empowers states to regulate their own elections. So we have done some of that at the state level. I think we should do a lot more. I think it's a much harder push at the federal level. But I will say one thing. Money in politics is bad. We should have less of it. Lobbying is sometimes, usually bad. Sometimes it's good. Like it's advocacy groups that come up, right? That's lobbying, right? And sometimes they bring really interesting perspectives, but on the whole, yes. What I don't want people to walk away from is a belief that there's like capture of everything that is passed. Spend a little time in Albany, spend a little time in DC, less so in DC. Spend a little time in Albany, you'll see bills passed every day that the big lobbyists hate. Ultimately, we have to win our elections by going to the people, and that's not to say that people are always following what they in their districts want, but I think in people's head, there is more prevalence of the worst examples, but it's because that's what's covered in the news. Like, the whole constituency wanted clean water, and the politician voted for there to be clean water. It doesn't make the 6 p.m. news. But the whole, and that's what happens 9 times out of 10. But the whole community wanted clean water, and the politician voted to pollute it with PFAS. That makes the 6 p.m. news, as it should. But that doesn't mean that's what happens at that same prevalence in legislature.
Let's do short questions and short answers, just so we can get
Yeah,
there.
short answers is a really good tip. That's sorry about that. Yeah.
So in New York, in your district, we have a lot of IP quality, like actors, publishing, that kind of stuff. So are any of your bills basically addressing AI? If I Google Harry Potter, I'm going to see Daniel Radcliffe, right? And my daughter's an actor, starting out in New York. So basically, like, what can you do in terms of really protecting IP? Do you believe that LLM generated content has any IP protection at all?
That what generated content?
So if I use an LLM to generate
LLM
content,
generated,
do you think there's actual IP, intellectual property there, or is it
Good,
not?
you got it.
That last part is a challenging legal question, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'll pass on that one. On the what we can do to protect it, my bills aren't directly addressing it, but that's because many of my colleagues are. And so we've been able to pass some things recently and more that we need to do. So one of the bills that passed last year was ensuring that in the state of New York, if you are a performer, you cannot sign away the rights, your digital rights to yourself, unless that contract has been reviewed by your collective bargaining unit, by union, or by your lawyer. So they can't force any like starting actor to be like, oh, and by the way, we own your image forever.
Including video games, that's a debate right now.
I think video games are included, but I will double check that. I will. So yeah, that's one of the things we've done. Sorry?
They're on strike because of that right now.
There you go. There you
You're
go.
gonna have to repeat what people show.
She said they're on strike because of that, and it's a follow-on from the strike that the Directors Guild and the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild had last summer to get those protections in their union contracts. But even people who are not union should have that protection too, which is why that bill's necessary. But yes, absolutely, they are on strike right now for that. Cool. Let's try. Can I include someone like shouting from the back? We see if that works.
Yeah, can I go over it? Yeah, go. Nuclear fission, you made the analogy earlier.
Yeah.
How do we avoid those mistakes? For example, right now we haven't built one in 50 years, and
Yep.
China has 3 times our power output. How do we not fuck that up with AI?
We don't have 3 Mile Island. The question was, hey, nuclear power, we've messed it up. We haven't built one in 50 years. How do we make sure we don't repeat that with AI? We don't have 3 Mile Island, which I'm being like a little flippant. But what I mean is a lot of that, what I would describe as over-regulation, came in response to a disaster. And so I think one of the things. Okay.
It wasn't a big deal, and something's always going to go wrong, right? Like
No. Sorry, I just, to be clear, I'm saying there were political actions taken because of it, right? And when you have a major disaster, the natural reaction of a government body is to clamp down in ways that I think maybe shifted risk. So I actually think making sure that nothing horrific happens with AI is the most pro-innovation stance, because the alternative on the other side is one that really cramps down and harms a lot of that innovation. Yeah. There's a question over here?
Yeah, I just want to clarify something before I ask my question. So
Yeah.
you had a safety plan?
Yeah.
And then the safety plan reviewed by third-party actors.
Yeah.
The safety plan has to be developed by the company that you're regulating, by the frontier model?
Yep.
And then do they get to select a third-party actor
Yes.
who reviews it?
Yes.
Isn't that a bit of a conflict of interest?
Yes.
Why is this in the bill with this?
Sure. Isn't it a conflict of interest that the third-party actor, that they get to select third-party actor? Yes.
And that they make the safety plan themselves.
Yes, 100%. And that is why I find it so crazy that people are saying, oh, this is stringent, we could never comply with it. Most developers have been very responsible. I expect most of them to be very responsible when the right guardrails are set up. If we pass this bill, if some set of unscrupulous auditors pop up, or we see some large developers really taking advantage of it, state legislature, we can take other action in the future. But there's a risk of over-prescribing that in a way that actually makes it impossible to deal with. And I wanted to make sure I didn't go on that side. But yes, I am worried about that. My ideal one would probably be stronger than it is. Sure.
All right, so we have like 10 questions, so let's answer them quickly.
Okay.
There's a lot.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Just why didn't you, what would the provision be to make it a bit stronger?
More set standards on what the audit needs to be, or some other body that validates them, or some set qualities to be an auditor. We didn't really put any of that. Yeah. Do you want to just call on like two or three people,
okay.
and then I'll
You
do
can
both
go,
of them in a
you can
row?
go, and
Yeah.
You can go, all three of you, and then you'll answer all three of them.
Okay, so if you can shout your questions, and I'll try to repeat it, and I'll do two or three in a row. So shorter questions will be really helpful for my memory.
Regarding Palantir, a company that's come under scrutiny for the export of technology, potentially utilizing AI to make decisions that lead to the deaths of people overseas, have you considered legislation to limit the harms or unreasonable uses of that technology?
Okay, then you. Yeah, go.
I'll answer, but yeah, go ahead. Do two or
What
three.
would you do to bring the AI revolution in New York? You go to SF, it looks like the future. In New York, we're killing startups left and right. We need to do something to enable startups. I'm a startup founder myself. I'm a constituent.
Awesome.
It's really hard to build
Yep.
stuff here.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah, go ahead.
How do you see the breakdown of support versus opposition to your bill, particularly like with the California bill that had some sort of strange bedfellows that were there? So I'm curious what your mapping of that is.
Cool. Okay, I'll try to take them in order. I don't have any direct legislation on impacts of Palantir or things like it. I left Palantir, and this is part of the public record, partially I was concerned with the direction it was going, and this was back in 2019. Sadly, there's federal preemption for a lot of it, so anything that's worked directly with the federal government, we can't really touch at the state level, but I'm open to ideas about how to keep all of us safe. How to bring the AI revolution to New York? I don't know that SF is a panacea or a utopia. I would start there, but we should set our standards higher than SF. So I take the point well. I worked in 2 startups before I ran for office. My wife's a YC founder, and so she's way cooler than me. And so yes, I think startups are super important. Small businesses are most of the jobs and most of the job growth in New York. I want that technology coming here. I want people working here. There's a lot of different things we have to do. Part of it are specific investments we can do in AI. I talked about making it easier to build data centers, to get transmission, to get you hooked into fiber. Part of it is investments like Cornell Tech and Empire AI, where we try to create these centers that can bring people together, that you can have those conversations that then spur the next idea from it and continue to put more support into it. One of the things that New York is doing in its budget, and I believe it's the first in any other state, is empowering the government to actually make venture capital investments in AI startups. So we're like directly putting funding back in to encourage growth. But also startups, AI startups, like any other business, there's a lot of regulatory red tape. And there's pieces that we could work on to make it easier to found a business, to keep that open, that I think the legislature really needs to focus on. It's a quick answer there. And I'm sorry, I forgot the third question. Help me.
What's your mapping of support?
Strange bedfellows in 1047. Yes. Similarly strange here. I have the large companies that it would actually apply to telling me this would end the world, which is funny because that's what the bill is meant to avoid. I have small companies telling me that it's regulatory capture and it's just benefiting the large companies. And again, I tell them to talk to the large companies. But we actually have a number of memos of support from New York startups. Like people that actually read the bill and look at it have found that like, oh, hey, this actually makes a lot of the technology we depend on safer. So we want that. We have support from venture capitalists. I was on Bradley Tusk's podcast, which is coming out in a few days, who's strongly in support as well. So most of the people that have like looked at it that represent small ones actually support it, and so that's maybe been an interesting change from 1047. And more people will pop up. So yes, it'll be odd. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. You, and you. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Speaking of Palantir, I just have a political question. When you ran for office, did your opponents use the fact that you used to work there against you? Along with this, like, the Peter Thiel connection? And if not, do you feel like that was a missed opportunity? Okay.
I'll do that one quickly. They didn't really use it, but that's because I brought it up to the press the week I launched. And I was like, I'm an open book on all of this, let's talk about it. I gave an interview, and then people read that, and they're like, okay. So I don't think it was a missed opportunity. I think it was dealt with.
All right, go ahead, Anthony.
Hey, so decade of cybersecurity experience with the federal government. So
awesome.
Yeah, so super interested. But my first thing is that thoughts on privacy, because it's a hot take, but citizens of this country have had all their data used for anything, right? Basically, we're the ones who are losing out on that.
Yep.
So what, if anything, can this do as those data sets are even easier to mine and use things for in applications in every single way? How can you protect the citizens in a way that they've never been represented?
I'll do this one quickly.
Okay.
The New York Privacy Act, when it was first written, however many years ago, I think there were 3 states that had a privacy bill in place. Now we're in the back half. It's over 25. Sure. That bill is long overdue. We just passed it this week through the Assembly Committee. I think it'll go to the floor. We'll see. I don't think it's going to go in the Senate. I hope I'm wrong, but it is a bill that I am advocating to pass. It's long overdue.
I got it.
So yeah.
Sweet.
Cool. What was the third?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Raise your hand if you have a question.
Yeah, I do. Okay. So first, how is there a way to prevent the robot apocalypse in a way? Like, I'm just saying, it's like, is it possible to have universal part of an off switch that would come with these large AI models? Because like we're already seeing that those efforts to shut it down are actually being defeated, and that's the most alarming thing that I've seen to date. Like all the regulation aside, like that's the one thing that I think needs to be put in place in some form.
So the question was, how do we stop the robot apocalypse? But in particular, like having a shutdown switch or something like that. And this bill doesn't have a shutdown switch, and 1047 did. And partially, I think a lot of opposition focused on that. What this bill does is say companies can design their own plan. Some will say, yes, we're going to keep a shutdown switch on everything. Some will say no. And I think over time, as their auditors, as there's others that look at this, we'll get to some consensus on what that should be and what the risk should be. I think the best step that we can take to reduce the risk of something really bad happening is help me pass this bill. And that's why I went through, hey, there were 8 at the start, and now there's 4, and honestly, I think this is the one that has the best shot. So it's probably not 100% the bill you would write, because it's not the 100% the bill that anyone here would write, because we're all different people. But it is the bill that I think captures the most of this risk and has a real chance of passing. So I don't want to say scan the QR code, but please get involved, because you can really make a difference. Yeah.
Final question, you and then you. Go ahead. All right, Conrad.
Can you go into a little bit more detail about how you came up with 5 million or 100 million or these numbers, and why you chose to use a monetary number as opposed to an alternative?
Because there is no alternative. Which again, somewhat flippantly. So the question was, how did I come up with the thresholds? The main one the way we got the knowledge distillation 5 million was DeepSeek, right? We didn't want to do a bill that would apply to a lot of the innovators in the US, and then when their models is ripped off, not apply to what's ripping it off. So DeepSeek, the first version wouldn't qualify because it was trained on O1, which wasn't a frontier model, but they spent over 5 million in doing it, did it in knowledge distillation, and that's how we came up with that threshold. The 10 to the 26 flops and 100 million is based on binding executive order partially, and the 1047 and a number of other places. I've had a lot of conversations with industry, as I said at the start, and they said, hey, it's not the perfect definition. I said, I know. Give me the perfect definition. Is there a universal capability threshold? I'll plug it into the bill right now. Should that threshold be a higher number than it currently is? Let me know when you agree on, and I'll put it in right now. And I've made that offer in August, and in December, and in February, and now here we are in May, into June. I stand by it. If industry wants to come together on one threshold for what's a frontier model, like, let's talk. This is the best that's been published, so it's what I'm using for now.
Do you hear?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Last two.
Curious to hear your thoughts, or if there's been any discourse at the policy level on the environmental impact of AI. Just things like, you reply thank you to ChatGPT and uses the same natural resources as like 5 evaporated lakes.
Yeah. It's a great question. My colleague, Senator Kristen Gonzalez, has been looking at this, and I think has introduced a bill on reporting on the environmental impacts of building data centers and of using it in these ways. So it is an active part of the conversation. I don't know if I explicitly said this at the start, but I don't believe the RAISE Act or even my package of AI bills, I think I have 9 right now, is covering everything that needs to be covered in AI. That'd be like saying I have 9 bills on the economy and it covers everything in the economy, right? There's a lot to do, and as a legislature we work together as a team on all of those, so that is part of the conversation for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Amazing. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Over here after. Okay, so thank you all, and thank you to the Saint for hosting us here today. And I encourage you to get a drink, get some food, talk to Alex, get interested in DeSci, and we'll see you next time. Thank you guys.